So, Swim Pony is my company. It is a vehicle basically to design immersive experiences that, for me, invite audiences into curious questions about the world. So I'm really interested in how we understand stories in the context of place and the present moment. So just to give you some background of other ways we've done that before hooking up with Toasterlab, this is a show called The Giant Squid, which I created in collaboration with my husband's company, the Berserker Residents. And we called it a cryptozoology horror comedy. For those of you who are familiar with H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythology, the squid is not a squid. And it was a piece in which we created sort of Steve Zissou meets Stephen King, and this team of terrible marine biology wannabes show up and give a science lecture demonstration that we toured to actual science lecture halls around the Philadelphia region. And we would retrofit the performance space, and of course at the end the Cthulhu demon attacks the audience. This is a piece we built in conjunction with Drexel's entrepreneurial game studio called War of the Worlds Philadelphia. And in it, we cast audiences as rebel fighters against an alien force called the Forgetting, which was a metaphor for gentrification. And to fight the Forgetting, audiences would take a mobile app around the area of the community center the performance took place in and gather stories in danger of being lost in order to fight the Forgetting from attacking the city. This piece, The End, was one that Ian actually was a beta tester of. It was a 30-day alternate reality game that explored personal fears of mortality. So each day players would text in to a phone number and undergo a small reflective prompt, like walking through a cemetery or writing your own obituary, and then have a conversation with The End, who is essentially a manifestation of death. The End was staffed by a team of live performers, and we had these dossiers on players, and essentially it was just a free-form exploration on how do you narrativize what winning life means to you. I'm really into trails this year, so we're actually concurrently exploring an analog card game at 23 environmental centers throughout the Delaware River watershed, where we use sense and memory-based prompts just to get people into different relationship to the environment. But the project that we're working on with Toasterlab is TrailOff. So you might recognize a couple people in that photo there. TrailOff is going to be a transmedial walking performance. It's a collaboration between Swim Pony, Toasterlab, and the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, and it'll be a free-to-download mobile app that'll premiere in June of 2020. And the core of the project is 10 original stories that are intended to be listened to as you walk a roughly 2-mile route on one of Philadelphia's circuit trails. They are original stories written by artists from the region who are kind of a unique combination of like really artistically rigorous and amazing creators that also have really substantive connections to communities that are traditionally underserved by environmental programming. So audiences will be able to access the app, and using GPS triggering, we're going to link these stories that have been created specifically to be heard on the trails as you walk through them. So it's kind of creating the sense of an immersive theater experience, but in a much more accessible way, while simultaneously sort of disrupting that sort of traditional like NPR beige idea of who is out on a nature trail. And part of the aim is really to think about like how do we imagine these spaces from the unique perspective of these writers. So for example, there's a suburban trail out in an area called Chester Valley that we've partnered a spoken word poet who is a trans Latinx 22-year-old. Not necessarily the traditional person you imagine on that space. And he's created this incredible walk with Aztec gods to the afterworld, right? So really sort of rethinking, like, what are the stories of nature that we imagine when we walk through these places? There are some opportunities for little Easter eggs, using phone data of time or date or weather to also sort of increase that sense of liveness. After you walk the trail, the app interface will shift into sort of a bonus content feature with podcast-style interview with the author to get some background about how they came up with the story, as well as historic and environmental content that maybe just didn't make it into the app story. Some of you might recognize that person. We built the sort of groundwork for the app through a series of workshops funded by the Network of Ensemble Theaters. The first one we did was a narrative workshop, really just to sort of ask questions in a curious way about like what kinds of stories work in this format and what is it about like being in a place, hearing a thing, having your brain, listening to music that is unique to that delivery medium. And also, what does it mean to cast a listener in this kind of a story? We also had an audio-specific workshop where we sort of looked at technical tricks and tools to share with the authors we eventually onboarded and tried some of these stories out on actual sites that we were using to see what worked and didn't work. And we finished with a technical residency where we started piloting the actual mechanics of what we were going to do. We ended by synthesizing all of that stuff into this amazing dramaturgical packet, which we could then hand to people sort of as a lessons learned based on the year's worth of research we'd done. Concurrently to all that, I was reaching out across Philadelphia basically to find any artist who would talk to me about this project. And after an initial email conversation, I sat down and had coffee with over 100 people one-on-one. To sort of underscore the idea that this project was going to be a conversation and a collaboration from the get-go. So many of the artists who applied and didn't get selected still really impacted the process because having that conversation helped me learn a lot about what people did and didn't know about coming into this format. These are 9 of the 10 authors we selected. One hasn't sat for her portrait yet. And if you go onto Swim Pony's website, you can learn about them. They are astonishing human beings. And in March, we had a residency that Justine came and co-facilitated, where we sort of launched them into their residency on their trail. We didn't make them live on the trail for the 3 months they worked on it. We've also been working with graphic designer Maria Chaplin to sort of create the look and feel of the app interface. And over the last month and a half, our sound designer Mike Kiley and I have been recording the actors finally with these final scripts in the studios and then pairing all that audio onto maps and spreadsheets to actually go into the interface that's currently being built. So for my last little bit of time here, it is not, I can't take you to the Hines Wildlife Refuge outside of Philadelphia, but I can share just a little bit of a radio edit that we've put together of one of the stories that's complete. So if, after I read this little summary, if you'll cue that to like 14:30 in the track. So this story is called The Land Remembers. It is by poet Jacob Winterstein, and it takes place at the Hines Wildlife Refuge, which sits next to the area of Eastwick in southwest Philadelphia. The summary is, in the 1950s, as part of urban renewal, Philadelphia displaced over 8,000 residents from Eastwick, aka the Meadows, thought to be one of Philly's only harmoniously integrated neighborhoods at a time when many racist housing policies were legal. In The Land Remembers, Nick, aka Nickel, aka Abe, reminisces about his last days living there. So you can go ahead and play that. These are some images from our workshop at the space.
We stopped paddling right here and just let the raft float. It barely moved. I looked back towards the meadows, at the part of the pond I imagine has always looked the same. Ox looked the other way, towards the airport. He wondered if flying felt like sitting on a raft. If sitting on the air felt like sitting on the water. I asked Ox why the pond was his favorite part of the park. He said it's like an outdoor movie theater that never plays the same picture twice. Like the time we saw 2 bald eagles attack that big bird with a fish in its claws. Or the time we saw a bird as big as a plane take off from behind a clump of cattails. Or the time we saw a bird that wasn't even bigger than my fist chase a hawk over the lake and past the trees. The last time Ox and me were here, we laid so still on this raft that the small birds forgot we were here and landed right next to us. That day, when the sun went and hid behind the trees, Ox picked up his paddle. It felt like he just had to pull the paddle through the water twice to take us from the middle of the pond all the way back to the banks. Let's go straight ahead down by the creek and see if Mr. Johnson comes by to fish today.
And you can cut it there. That's it. Thanks.
Ha 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 ha!